Hello, my name is Rishi Supra. I'm a senior consultant at LTS, and I had the pleasure of going to the Microsoft Business Application Summit in Seattle this year in July. And there were lots of new announcements around Power BI, and I wanted to bring some of those out in this presentation called Where Power BI is Going, the 7 Steps to Data Heaven. Now, I also went to the conference last year and I did a presentation with the same name. So the FY18-19 version of this presentation, and I brought up those 7 points just in summary here, and the video is there available on my YouTube channel if you want to have a look. But there's a couple of points I want to bring out which I mentioned last year, which I think are even becoming bigger this year, and actually we can really see a trajectory in terms of where this is going. So one of those was around, business intelligence to actionable insight. It was all about kind of power apps and taking, not just having BI being a rear view mirror of your business, but also being able to do something with that data, pass it into an application, run a workflow on it, and all that kind of stuff. And then reports and stories was all looking at, bookmarks, drill through pages, all those kind of functionalities that allow you to tell really powerful, engaging stories with your reports. And one of the biggest ones here with the self-serve BI going to corporate BI is, traditionally there's always been these two extremes of BI reporting. There's been the IT authored, structured, governed, controlled, can handle large data, and those are the IT authored reporting solutions. And if you want to send out static emails or standardized emails or standard reports to 10,000 people every Monday morning, those are the kind of tools you wanted to do. But they're also very flexible and not very agile. So what lots of business units tended to gravitate towards instead was Excel, which is the complete opposite. It's very flexible, very agile, but doesn't have any of that kind of corporate BI capability around security, governance, ability to handle large data volumes. And something like Power BI has been that kind of middle ground. And one of the things we really saw was Power BI changing from just being, bits of both self-serve and corporate BI to actually being the best of both worlds. So taking whatever you can really get as the best from corporate BI, so looking at things like governance and security, and putting all of that structure around having an IT centralized data model and dedicated hardware and capacity, and bringing that into Power BI as well. So what they started to do last year was introduce a Power BI Premium, which was the premium offering for where you've got, several thousand users. You don't need to separately license all the viewers, and you can also then have dedicated hardware capacity. And then into Power BI Premium, they're also bringing in now a functionality which we'll look at later, which is around analysis services, and bringing some of that functionality to Power BI. So this is something that's a trend that's really continuing. Some of the other things on here were things around customizability and extensibility. So things like having custom connectors, and really enhancing that get data experience as well, which is also something that we've seen again coming out through here. And insights within application to insights where you are. This is kind of to do with mobile and also Power BI embedded. Those have also had a lot of work done to them over this year, and I'm not really going to cover Power BI embedded and mobile in any real detail here, but those are other areas which I think is really worth looking into. So in terms of where I think it's going now, I think there's 7 key things again that I wanted to bring out around where Power BI is going. So we'll go through each of these in a bit more detail and then come back and do a recap. So the first thing is more flexible data models. Now, for anyone who's familiar with Power BI, especially compared to potentially other data visualization tools, you'll recognize that Power BI is unique because it isn't just a data visualization tool. In fact, the most important part of it, and what I see as the key deliverable of a Power BI report that I deliver to my clients, is actually the data model and not the visualizations. Because what we tend to do is build a structured data model that's automated in terms of where it's getting its data from, is structured in a nice star schema that makes sense to represent business entities in, and also is, it's simple and easy to use. Now, those kind of data models, and then, those then feed into what sit behind the Power BI report. And what we tend to do is try and split out the data models from the reports. So then the data model becomes, something that sits on a Power BI service or can sit in analysis services, and then reports can connect to that. So it's just a front end. Power BI just becomes a front end and connected to reports. Now, so typically there'd be 2 ways in which you could build these data models. So one is by importing data in and holding it in the Power BI engine, the VertiPack engine, which is a very fast database and is optimized for reporting. Or the other option is to actually not hold any data into Power BI, but instead to do a direct query back to your data sources. So if you were doing a direct query back to, say, a SQL database, then as soon as you looked at a report or, clicked on something in a visual, it would figure out the query it needs, it would convert that from DAX into SQL and then fire a SQL query back at the database and show the results. So no data is ever stored in Power BI. It's not really using this VertiPack engine. So really you've had one or the other option. And the reason you might want to do direct queries if you wanted near real-time data, so literally live, and also if your data model was too big to then fit into Power BI. If you had far too much data to be able to consume, that's why you would have gone down direct query. But then you wouldn't have had any of those benefits of the VertiPack engine. Whereas what Microsoft have done now is bring in the ability to do both. So you can have in a single model, you can have a direct query connection to a relational data source, and also a import model. So some of your tables can be imported and use that VertiPack engine, use that aggregation feature and that ability to be able to do that, whilst at the same time for your transactional data holding stuff in direct query. And this is where the composite models comes in. So you can have here you can see on the screenshot it's got the tables. For each table it's got a selection as to whether this is to be an import or a direct query. So you can have some tables that are imports, so this might be your mapping tables and things like that, and some tables which are direct query. And in fact you can have multiple direct queries connections in the same model, which is something you've never been able to do before. And part of that then is also aggregate tables. Now what this allows you to do is it builds on that functionality of composite models and allows you to have tables which are aggregations levels, so for high level summaries of your data, so grouped by product or customer or geography or whatever views you tend to see your data by in terms of what levels you do your calculations at. That's your aggregate tables, and that's making use of that VertiPack engine. And then you have your detailed tables, and your detailed tables are only ever hit when you need to query at that level of detail, because 99% of the time your Power BI report is actually querying data at a fairly aggregated, summarized level. You're never really doing things just at the transactional level. You're grouping or summing over a particular dimension or set of dimensions, and those set of dimensions are what you can hold in your aggregation tables, and they'll perform extremely fast. If you then did a drill down and it went into, you had a drill down page which showed you individual transactions, the Power BI is now automatically clever enough, or will be with aggregate tables, be automatically clever enough to know that that's best served as a direct query connection, and it will fire a direct query to the database and bring back those transactional records. So it allows you again to have the best of both worlds, best of both direct query and the VertiPack engine in Power BI. And then many-to-many relationships. So typically in a kind of standardized style schema, you'd have dimensions, which would be your one row per dimension value, so per product, per customer, per date. And then you'd have your fact table, which obviously has each transaction recorded and have many times, or will have, customers repeated and dates repeated and so on. So that gives rise to a kind of one-to-many relationship. And that's been the traditional structure, which has been recommended for Power BI and also supported in the data model, in the sense of you could only ever traditionally have one-to-many relationships. Now, as a way of actually enabling the composite models and the aggregate tables, what Microsoft have done is also brought in many-to-many relationships. That's shown here in the diagram by the two stars either side. So usually one of those would have a one instead of a star. And what this really represents is that you don't need to have a bridge table when you've got a genuine many-to-many. So where you've got here in this case is I had classes and recipient classes, but there were multiple classes and then multiple recipient classes, and they all map to each other. So I generally have to have a bridge table that has one unique value and do a many-to-one and then a one-to-many. Whereas now you can just do a many-to-many straight without the need for that bridge table. One word of caution on this though is it is something that can get quite messy, especially because many-to-many relationships also then have bidirectional filters, which means your data can start filtering in ways that you hadn't intended if you're not very careful with the use of this functionality. So next is application lifecycle management, and this is really about what I was mentioning around bringing the functionality of analysis services into Power BI. So for those of you not familiar with it, analysis services is essentially a server-based version of the data model that sits behind Power BI. So it's a server-based, and it's much more robust. Its performance is, can run on kind of dedicated hardware, but also it has a lot of benefits around its functionality in the sense of it can be centrally controlled and governed and managed by IT. So one of the challenges with Power BI files is there's no real version control, there's no real diff comparison. If you've got multiple developers working on a Power BI report at the same time, you've got no real way to manage that process and merge changes from one branch into another and things like that. Whereas this is something you have been able to do with the analysis services model. And also you can do things like automate things, like use APIs to be able to refresh data and actually not just bring in all of the data. And this has been one of the big things in Power BI is every time it does a refresh, it brings in everything. So if you've got 10 years of data in there, you've had to bring in 10 years of data each time you do a refresh. Whereas analysis services and now Power BI Premium as well, you have the ability to do incremental refresh. So that's where you can then specify you only want to bring in data for the last day or for the last 5 days, and then keep all the other data that's in there still in memory, still in cache, still there for performance, ready to be queried. So that's really a good way to manage especially a large data model. And typically, as I said, there's functionalities existed only in analysis services, whereas now the ability to be able to connect tools like DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, BISM Normalizer to a model, to a data model, which you've typically been able to do in analysis services, be able to do version control, diff comparison, merges, also then use the functionality of analysis services to do things like incremental refresh and automate that. All of that is coming to Power BI. So essentially you'll be able to use different tools to connect to the Power BI data model, so it exposes it through XML endpoints, and then you'll be able to manage those data models in a much more governed and controlled way. So then we're also looking out at improved data prep and integration. So this is the query editor stage of Power BI. And this is also, it might seem like actually there hasn't been much that's happened to the query editor, because on the face of it, it looks exactly the same as it did when Power BI first came out and the same as Excel. And that's intentional. But there is a lot of stuff that's gone on behind the scenes here to make that experience better. So one of those is bringing kind of artificial intelligence into it. And one of the things you're able to do in Power Query, in the query editor, is you're able to join data sets together. So merge data sets. So look up one or more columns in one table and join it against one or more columns in another table and return, the rows that match both, the rows that match one, the rows that match the other, the rows that match all the combinations of all the tables. So you can do like all those kind of SQL joins that you could do in SQL Server, inner, outer, left, inner, left, outer, right, inner, so on, that you could do in SQL Server, you can do in Power Query, and you have been able to do since the beginning. But for example, what you haven't been able to do is match where it's not exactly the same, and the query editor is case sensitive, so you've never really been able to match when, even if you had an uppercase A in one and a lowercase a in the other, it wouldn't find a match between those two, even if they were otherwise identical. What Microsoft are bringing in is fuzzy matching for that, so you can actually bring in different variations of a match for names. So, Will, Bill, William, and you can set up different synonyms to mean different things. So you can say, actually, whenever it says US, I want that to mean the same thing as USA or, United States of America. And then it will know actually that those two are the same thing, even though they're clearly not in terms of a text literal string comparison. And you'll be able to set the level of fuzziness that you like to match on this, as well as to say provide your own inputs into that, your own synonyms. And data profiling is then an experience in the query editor which will allow you to be able to look at the shape of your data as a whole. And one of the challenges with the query editor, working in a query editor, is it only shows you a preview window. And then if you want to see if any errors have happened, if you change a data type or something, you'll have to go through all of those rows or keep errors, or and then see what comes up, or cross your fingers, press close and apply, and then wait to see if any errors come back. What data profiling will allow you to do is see as histograms the distribution of that data, how many blanks there are, how many errors there are, how many you've got of different values. So you can start to see at a glance, actually, is your data look right, or does it actually look like you've got repeated values for some months and no data for other months, or something like that. So that will be really useful in terms of just working with that data. We've then got new connectors, and again, this is something that the data integration team within Power BI have really worked a lot on, building loads and loads of new connectors, and not just software as a service providers, not just databases, but all the kind of sources you could possibly want. And one of those that's been most requested on the Idea site was import from PDF. So it seems a lot of people still have PDF documents that they need to read data out of, and at the moment that's quite a clunky process. So I've had a sneak preview of this functionality, and import from PDF is coming into the query editor, and I tried it on quite a complex file. So it was a fun file with a couple of 100 pages in it, and it picked out everything that even closely resembled a table in each and formatted it properly as a table to consume in Power BI. And it also formatted the page as a whole and gave me the text in the page that wasn't in the table separately. So it was a really, really good experience, I think, from that import from PDF. There's a few things I know they're working to get just right in terms of where things span multiple rows, for example, and that's things that will come soon. But I was really impressed with this connector. I know import from PDF will be something that will be really appreciated in the community, along with Essbase, which is the Hyperion Oracle connector, to be able to connect to that cube that sits behind that. And lastly, we've got IntelliSense and M. And again, I know this is something the community have been waiting for a very long time, and probably haven't really been able to understand why they haven't done it, because IntelliSense really makes programming so much easier. You can't remember all the syntax or the structure for the formulas, or which order you need to put the arguments in, and IntelliSense just handles all of that for you and just gives you tips as you're writing as to what you could mean and what the structure is of certain functions and things like that. So this will be really brilliant, and there's a little sneak preview of it in the advanced editor. Next, we're looking at better authoring experience. So this is apart from the query editor. Once you've got your data model and you're building reports, there's lots more improvements around how you're able to do things like format your visuals. So the biggest thing for me out of this whole authoring experience, and actually one of the whole things, I think the biggest thing for me in Power BI Desktop as a whole that was announced, was the thing around dynamic expressions. So what you're able to do now is, if you want to have a dynamic title that reflects the what's been selected elsewhere in filter selections, either as a report title or as a chart title, you have to do that as a measure and then have it as a card and size it appropriately and things like that. And also things like colors, you've just never been able to set dynamically. Whereas what we have now is actually the ability to set things like colors and titles and other formatting elements by use of a formula. So here we can see it's putting a little formula in there to choose the color. So it actually can be much more dynamic, and it's much better and much more control and flexibility. This is something that I've seen in other data visualization tools, and I think will be really welcome in Power BI. And for me, it was one of the biggest differentiators of other tools. Next, we've got things like model folders. So this is now then in the data view, and what you're able to do in the data view is they showed an example of where we had a very, very complex model. So we had 100 tables or so, all with different joins between them. It could be very hard to see which tables relate to which, where those lines are, and especially when you've got overlapping lines, and also what tables are included in a particular group of tables that you want to see. So that's the ability they've introduced now, to be able to have model folders. So to be able to group particular tables into a group of folders, and then you've got different tabs for those within the relationships view. So the relationships view, the data view, relationships view. Right, so then we've also got selection of built-in themes. So here you're looking at the various different themes that you've got, and typically you've had the out-of-the-box theme, or you've been able to import a JSON file to reflect your own custom corporate branding. And building those JSON files, there was no UI for that, at least I haven't seen one. People in the community have created their own UI. So for example, powerbi.tips, you can go onto and create your own JSON file off a selection of colors and other settings. But what Power BI are introducing is then the ability to be able to have a preset selection of themes. So you can choose from quite a few, or again, you can import your own. With the last one here, nicer UI and visual header control. So this is around the formatting pane been much more flexible, and actually it's also a lot nicer to use. They've done things like put animations of the pane and made the sliders more, feel better interactive. I don't know exactly what they've done, but it feels good. And then in terms of the UI for the visual headers, this has been one of the big things. So what's always been at the top of Power BI, every Power BI visual, is this grey bar that you just can't seem to push up against. So you can't, push your tiles beyond a certain point on the page, and things overlap and things like that. And that bar is what contains the drill up, drill down, focus mode. So what Microsoft did last month was actually replace that bar with a bar that collapses into itself. So you could then have you can push them to the edge because the bar is no longer fixed at the top of the visual. And also they've made that bar nicer, so in terms of the icons. And then they've also given the author more experience on what's shown in that bar. So do you want to show drill up and drill down? Do you want to show the focus mode? If not, you can turn things on and off. So you've got a lot more control over it. It looks a lot nicer. And because it doesn't sit at the top of the bar, you've got a lot more flexibility in the placement of your visuals. The next we look at a better consumption experience. So we have better authoring experience, a lot for the report authors to be able to build out. And now we're looking at the consumption experience. And this is where Microsoft understandably spent a lot of effort in making sure it's really good, because this is what their end users really see, not just the report authors and the developers. And one of the things we were talking about earlier was around how your IT governed authored reports would be those static kind of reports that go in, when you're distributed to a large audience. And there is still definitely a need for that within organizations. There's still definitely a need to send a standardized report that has been the same for a while, and people know what information it shows, and to send that out to a large audience every, say, Monday morning. And that's typically been the role of SQL reporting services. And so, typically there've been two different products. You've had reporting services and then Power BI, which has still been around the more ad hoc exploration and that kind of analysis. Whereas Microsoft have understandably now tried to bring the two worlds together a little bit. So we've had the ability for a little while to be able to pin SSRS reports into Power BI report server, but now what we're going to be able to do is bring together SSRS and Power BI, so you can view your SSRS reports as part of your Power BI estate, and I believe manage them in the same way, which will be really interesting, because then you can have those kind of reports along with your self-serve reports, all done in the same interactive manner and all in the same portal experience. And also one of the main things on there was the ability to export to PDF. So again, this has been something that's been asked on the idea side. I've seen it quite a lot come up around being able to print from desktop, and also being able to just kind of export to PDF. And export to PDF naturally serves both purposes, because once it's in a PDF, it's in a nice printable format too. So as of this month, as of the August release, under the file menu, there's export to PDF, and it will export all the visible pages of your report into a nicely formatted PDF document. Then there's Power BI Home, Comments, and Personal Bookmarks. And these are some of the features that are the consumption experience features that are in Power BI Service, or come into Power BI Service. So Power BI Home is the idea that you have a single pane with where you can see all of your reports and dashboards across various workspaces, rather than having to go workspace into workspace into workspace. And you can also search across them and do a Q&A, for example, across all of the reports, across all of the workspaces that you have access to. So this will be something, and apps presumably. So this will be something that will be really nice from a first user impression kind of experience around, especially if you've got lots of reports, and you can take it wherever you want to go. Comments is again something that's been really interesting to see on visuals, because typically if you wanted to ask a question about something, or to someone else, you'd have to take a screenshot of that and then put it in an email, and then get an email response and maybe circulate that to other people who might need to know the same information. Whereas what they're bringing in now then is comments into the Power BI service. So next to particular visuals or next to reports, you could write comments, and you can address particular people because it's linked into Active Directory, and then those people can reply, and everyone can see all the comments next to each other in this comments pane. Personal bookmarks builds on the functionality that exists currently, as long as you're not using any custom visuals in your report, which is that when a user goes into a report on the Power BI service and they apply their own filter selections, next time, just for them, it remembers what those filter selections are. Personal bookmarks takes that one step further and then being able to define their own set of filter selections and a snapshot view of how they want the report to look, and then save that down as a bookmark, and then that will come back for them in a moment. So at the moment you do have bookmarks across the report, which the author builds, and different people can navigate through the bookmarks. So these are just different views, filter views and snapshots of what's visible or not visible on a page. And the ability then to be able to do personal bookmarks, to be able to define your own filter selections that are useful to you, will be also very welcome. Nicer UI, I touched on this a little bit earlier around the header bars, the visual header bars. That's one aspect of nicer UI. Also the sort menu in that ellipses has also been improved. So rather than just having all of the fields in there and then a little A to Z, which you never really could tell which way it was facing, now it's got two distinct sections. One is sort by and one is the field. So you can set both easily and kind of just see a bit more about what's going on. And last one on here, on this section, on the UI section, is pivot tables. Now again, this has been something that people have always wondered why it was never in Power BI, because they're used to those Excel style pivot tables where you can expand and collapse and see it exactly like a pivot table, drill all down to the next level, which you could do in a matrix, but here used to the Excel specific functionality. And that's been missing in Power BI because the matrix doesn't represent exactly how the Excel pivot table was. And now what Power BI team are bringing in is pivot tables, true pivot table formats with that expand collapse functionality into Power BI. And lastly on this page, we've got copy and paste data out of visuals. So this is really looking at being able to, at the moment, what you have to do is if you have a visual or a table and you want to do something with the data out of that, which is naturally quite common, you can export the data. So you can export all the data out of the visuals by right clicking, export, giving a name for CSV file, selecting somewhere to save it down, and then open up that file and getting into Excel and then copying and pasting and putting it into an email or whatever it is. That's still quite a long process. Whereas actually, if you just wanted to get hold of a couple of numbers and just stick them into an Excel spreadsheet or stick them into an email, then you could do that now, or in a future release, by being able to just select those numbers, copy values, or copy values, copy selection. So whether you select some items, you can copy that, or you can just copy the values out of what you're selecting. So that would be something that, again, just make that experience a bit nicer. It's one of those small things, but actually makes quite a big difference from that experience. Look, next we're looking at artificial intelligence in Power BI. So this is where Microsoft is very, very hot on artificial intelligence. It's got a lot in the data science space, and a lot in around robotics and all of those great things where we really see. I mean, even going to the point of running things on quantum computing and things like that. And even within Power BI and even with Excel, they've been bringing artificial intelligence into the products and infusing them into all applications, even in Office. If anyone's noticed, when you go into PowerPoint and it gives you design ideas, that's all artificial intelligence that sits behind that. And Power BI lends itself very well to artificial intelligence because it's a data-driven application. It has a data model, a data engine that can be manipulated through AI in the background and shown visually to users. And that's what things like Quick Insights do. So you go into reports and you have Quick Insights. It runs a machine learning script on your data, gives you insights that you might not have seen had you not drawn those visuals and drilled down to that detail, and displays them all to you as insights that as visuals that you can then choose whether you want to include as part of your dashboards. And within Power BI itself as well, there's been a few more artificial features that are coming. So traditionally, Power BI has also had great integration with R. So you've been able to connect to an R script rather than connecting directly to a file or database, and then having that R script apply some algorithms or apply some clustering, for example, on your data before it hits your data model. Or you've been able to have your data model in Power BI and then use R to create a visual and have that as an R visual in your data model. Again, it would be fully interactive. And so R has been a very popular open source language. Microsoft acquired a company that specialized in R, Revolution Analytics, a few years ago, and that integration was really great. But Python has been increasingly popular, and more so than R probably in recent times, around being an accessible data science language, and also having application far beyond data science. So web development and all sorts of things. So Python is something that's really widely used, and now they're bringing that same integration that they had for R for Python. So that will be really welcome for people who use the tool already. Next, we're looking at enhanced Q&A. So the Q&A functionality in Power BI has been the ability to be able to ask natural language questions of your data. So the idea behind this is that you've built a certain set of reports based on certain questions that you got as part of requirements around the requirements gathering process. But those might not be the questions that your audience specifically have when they come to look at a report one day. They might want to know something different, and they don't necessarily have the code, the skills, or the ability skills to be able to craft those themselves in a Power BI report. They're consumers. So for the consumer, what Microsoft have made available is the ability for them to ask a question in natural language, like show me the top 10 suppliers for this product in March 2018, and it will understand that question semantically and draw you a visual that answers that question. This is an example I've taken on this screenshot. It's from my technology trends report. So I've just said show me sentiment score versus the stock price by company and by month of year, and it's just plotted me a scatter chart. Recognize I had versus in there. This ability is actually even in the report view. So even previously you've been able to do Q&A on dashboards across all of the reports that kind of feed that dashboard. But now you've been able to do it, as of a couple of months ago, you've been able to do it in the reports. So you've been able to build a Q&A button. It will load a dialogue for you to ask Q&A of the report. And Microsoft are making more enhancements in this area. So they're allowing, for example, follow-on questions. So you can ask a question of your report, get an answer, and then say, actually, that's an interesting thing. Can you drill into this? Or actually, how does this look now if I layer on another question on top of the question I asked before? So, which is more natural language. Typically, you're not restricted in a conversation, hopefully, to just one question. So the natural language follow-on will make it more like a chatbot experience, which again will be really great. And I think you can actually interact with chatbots, and this is probably where it's all going. We've also got inbuilt categorization and sentiment analysis. So this was demoed as part of the Business Application Summit, kind of the Power BI keynote session, and it was showing an example of how actually, rather than having to call complex Azure machine learning APIs to be able to do basic sentiment analysis or basic categorization on your data, you could do that within Power BI itself. There wasn't a huge amount showing exactly how that would work behind the scenes, but look forward to really seeing how that would work, because again, those are very common things that are done on data from a data science perspective. So categorization, sentiment analysis, and if there's tools built into Power BI to do those automatically and leverage that Azure machine learning in the background without having to specifically call it, then great. Let's look at their artificial intelligence and data prep stage. So we touched on this earlier when looking at fuzzy matching and looking at the data profiling. Both of those are kind of AI in a query editor, but also there was a lot of mention around some of the things that are just getting better and better in terms of those AI features. So one of the examples that Miguel mentioned in his session was around column from examples. So this is where you have a set of data that you brought in, and you know what your data needs to look like at the end, but you don't know how to get from those rows of data to your output. You don't know which transformation steps you need to apply. So what you do is you go to add column from example, and you start just typing examples of what you want your outputs to be, and it figures out then what you need. So it says, oh, I can see actually what you're doing. You're taking the data that's just there's characters that are in between, after the @ sign and before the dot sign, and you're extracting that bit of the element there. I'll write a formula to be able to do that, and then it produces a column with a calculator column with a formula in it that allows you to do that. And there's also things like being able to do this from a web page, so where you don't even have a column of data and a tabular format data, you just have elements on the page, and you start typing out some elements on the page, and it looks at the HTML and knows where to pick up the elements that you're looking for in your HTML, because presumably the page is still formatted to a certain structure of div tags and things like that. So it actually is intelligent enough to know which elements of a web page you want to look at. So this is really great stuff, and stuff that's really building up even more. And it's great to see, as I say, that the query editor is also getting a lot of work, a lot of attention. It's not just the visual front end of it. And lastly, I've left probably the biggest thing for last, and one of the most important things that came out of the summit was this idea of data flows. So this started off being called, if you heard of it, CDS for analytics, Common Data Service for Analytics, and it was called the blob storage places where you could store the data was called data pools. Now the whole technology, including those former data pools, are called data flows. So data flows, the idea behind this is a self-serve data platform, and this is to address a typical challenge, especially in quite large organizations, where it's very easy to do ETL in the query editor to connect to some data and do those transformations, but it's not very easy to then centralize those anywhere. So if you wanted to, have those run on a schedule separately to the reports that are built off it, and to have data stores that are, managed and controlled a bit better, then you haven't really been able to do that. You've been able to just extract the data model, but not any of the data processing. And, what you've had to then do is either have two extremes again within your organization. So you've had to either do all of your kind of ETL in these individual Power BI desktop files, or you've had to invest, millions, potentially millions of pounds in a large scale proper data platform solution, which can store your data, can transform it, and, hold your data at those various stages of, raw, cleaned, transformed, optimized, and then made your optimized data available to Power BI. And that's the proper way to do it with a data platform. But as I say, that's very expensive to do, especially across a large organization, and sometimes quite impractical, especially because these systems can't connect to, or a data platform can't necessarily connect to all the different types of solutions across systems and databases across an organization. So it's been quite a very complex thing to build and to model. So again, where Power BI is tackling that issue is by trying to build a halfway house, a solution that has the best of both worlds. So it has some of those benefits of a fully fledged data platform, but also some of that business analyst control, flexibility and management, indeed data ownership, if you like, of the data that's feeding into Power BI. So this is what data flows are. They're essentially a layer that sits above Power BI, and it's blob storage layers, which interact with Power BI. So Power BI can connect to those data flows, and those data flows can in turn connect to Azure, or can connect to lots of different things to be able to shape your data. So it's being able to build your data platform through these blob storage blobs, and be able to then connect those blobs into Azure, so into Azure Data Factory, to be able to run some stored procedures on it into Data Warehouse, Data Lake Analytics, and then push that data into a optimized format for consumption in Power BI. So, I don't think it's necessarily going to do data platform specialists out of a job, because I think there is still a real need for full scale data platform solutions. But what this could potentially do is help organizations get on the journey there by starting with, some fairly lightweight data platform architecture. So data flows, maybe starting with things like Logic Apps, or even Microsoft Flow, and then building those out and slowly providing a blueprint, providing a framework for migrating those across to a fully fledged data platform already. And the last thing on there, which I wanted to put out, was the common data model. And this has again been one of the benefits of a single data platform, because it contains, and the reality is never that, but the idea, in principle at least, is that it contains single tables and single entities for things across an organization. So rather than every business unit having slightly different names for customers, it has a single customer table that things feed into, and those fields for a customer then can defined and can be used consistently across the organization. Now, what the common data model allows you to do is exactly that. It allows you to define business entities, and there's a whole load that come from Dynamics 365 that are already in there. So all the common ones of customer, product, time dimensions, accounts, all of those kind of things are in there, and you can add your own. And it defines for each one what the mapping is between, what the fields are that belong to that entity. And then what we see here is Power Query in the web. And this is really exciting because what it means is that query editor that's typically been tied into Power BI desktop files has now been taken out and put into a web-based interface. So it's much more accessible without Power BI desktop, but also it means because it's now Power Queries essentially sitting on the cloud and in the Power BI portal, it can start to connect to things and do things that what you are limited to, which you can't really do in the Power BI desktop. So this is where it can then connect to these different data sources, connect into Azure and return back your data in blob storage. But then also once you do that Power Query stage, you then map your outputs of your Power Query editor, your query editor, each table, each query, into the common data model. So into where does this go? Into a organization firm-wide data model, common data model. Where does this go? Where does this field map into? Which does it mean? Does it mean accounts? Does it mean customer ID? And then that common data model becomes almost like a semantic model as well in a way, because it then allows you to be able to then define what those data entities mean. And then when you're consuming those in Power BI and when you're connecting to them, there's a common understanding of what's being shown across Power BI reports because they're coming from a centralized store that have had that integration. So that's a wrap up of what's been covered in that business application summit. Say lots of different announcements. We've got more flexible data models, so the ability to have direct query and import data tables in the same model and multiple direct queries, and application lifecycle management. So this is really bringing in the whole analysis services functionality of incremental refresh, partitions, XMLA endpoints being exposed to various different tools for management, version control, things like that. All of that being put into Power BI Pro. We've got improved data prep and integration, so data profiling, looking at the fuzzy matching, better authoring experience. So this is things around functional expressions to be able to define formatting controls, looking at the ability to be able to group your data tables into model folders, and being able to have that UI experience around more control over the formatting, for example, of the visual headers. We've got better consumption experience, and this is all around SQL Server reporting services being integrated into Power BI as well as analysis services, and also being able to export to PDF. So from desktop, export to PDF, and you've got your print views there. And also being able to copy and paste out of visuals and just have that better experience in the UI for things like visual headers, as well as on the service for things like personalized bookmarks and comments. We've got artificial intelligence within Power BI, so we've got Python integration. So following the same kind of structures as we've seen with R, and hopefully we'll see a whole community of R visuals coming out in the near future, of Python visuals coming out, and also automatic categorization, sentiment analysis. And we've got lots of different AI again around the data prep, which is really exciting. And lastly, we've got the self-serve data platform. So this is data flows. This is then being able to have your blob storage, which Power BI can connect to, and that blob storage being able to connect into Azure and being able to connect to Azure Data Factory, to have machine learning run on it, to have your data transformations applied to it, and then be able to exposed as a data flow through a common data model through into Power BI. So this is all very exciting. I hope you've gained a good idea about the direction in which Power BI is going now. And bear in mind, Power BI is just one small element of the entire Azure data platform and data stack and machine learning and all the other great things, and Office 365 and all those other great things that Microsoft are doing. So we're starting to see a lot more integration between all of this as well. The conference this year was actually combined with Dynamics 365 as well as Power BI and the Power Suite. So really looking forward to seeing not just how Power BI is going, but actually everything around it and how it's all coming together, because all of this ultimately affects how we work every day. So our working lives are really going to be changed, as well as potentially our personal lives, by all of these improvements and enhancements. And a big thank you to Microsoft for all of their efforts in making this happen.